grow again. That's what's going on in America, and it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing because it was badly needed. He's also now eliminating U.S. aid and all the backstabbing that used to happen under the Biden administration and previous administrations. Even under Trump one, while Trump and India were having good negotiations, you had the agencies trying to get the government kicked out. All of this happening under the covers. So Trump is cleaning house and whipping his own country into shape. Also, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Okay, so can I ask Professor Brahmachalani that? I mean, ultimately, there's also a view, and to be fair, that this trade protectionism is basically to protect your, indigenous industries. If they need to compete, at the end of the day, you have to open up. That's what we've done in technology. That's what we've done in the banking system. You can name any number of sectors. Anything that's been opened up to competition has actually done better, and Indian companies have actually thrived. But when it comes to some of these, sectors like leather and textiles, etc., protectionism is actually, rewarding in some form, not a high level of competence. Do you buy that argument that this could actually be a good thing for Indian industry, that they will up their game, as it were? Or do you think this is going to fundamentally upend the rules of the trading order as we know it?
Zaka, protectionism is on the rise in the West, in Europe, in North America. Populism means protectionism. This is what Trump has embraced. He wants India to open up while he becomes more protectionist. But as Mr. Wadhwa said, Trump employs tactics, negotiating tactics, that he first outlined in his 1987 book, The Art of the Deal, in which he said that you can advance your negotiating goals through some flattery, and we saw that in the news conference. He called Modi a tougher negotiator than me, just the way a few days earlier, when the Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba came calling, he said Ishiba is a stronger leader than I would wish he was. So he blends some flattery, some cajoling, with hardball tactics, including threats and coercion. So we saw in the last 24 hours that Trump, while being sweet and nice, he has lived up to his reputation as a clever businessman who likes to drive a hard bargain. He is quite serious about wiping out America's trade deficits. The problem for India is this, that India has trade deficit with the rest of the world, but a trade surplus with the US.
Yep.
So to erase that trade surplus with the US would mean buying $40 to $50 billion worth of more American goods. As it is, the trade deficit of India, or the overall trade deficit of India, makes up more than between 10 to 12% of India's GDP annually. It weighs down India significantly in the economic realm. In comparison, America's overall trade deficit with the world, even though it's much larger than India's overall trade deficit, makes up only less than 4% of America's GDP. So India's trade deficit is already very onerous.
Okay.
And Trump expects India, and he said in his opening statement at the news conference that he expects India to buy many billions dollars worth of defense equipment just this year. The question is, where is the room for India economically? As it is, you mentioned, Zaka, that India has these very high tariffs on a number of items. That's true. But we should not forget that India's average tariff rate on imports from America has declined to less than 5%. This is what the New York Times reported. And more importantly, when Trump talks about reciprocal tariffs, the US does not import the same goods from India that India imports from the US. So what does reciprocity here mean? How will they apply reciprocal tariffs when India's imports from the US are dominated by three things: hydrocarbons, weapons, and gems? And on those three items, On hydrocarbons, the tariffs are negligible. On gems, again, they are quite reasonable. So you're looking at small items like leather or apples, gives you a distorted picture of India's tariff regime.
Okay.
And this whole concept of reciprocal tariffs is going to be very hard to implement for the US.
So, what they call general weighted average tariff as per WTO norms. For India, it's 9.5. For the United States, it's 3%. But then, of course, the US economy is probably 10 times bigger than the Indian economy. But anyway.
Zach, I was talking about the average tariff rate of India in relation to imports from the US.
For the US, okay.
That has come down to less than 5%.
So let me go back to Ambassador. I want to now move on to the defense and the energy part. Clearly, Trump views both defense and energy as a way to balance out the trade. Now, on the defense part, of course, the headline was him saying in the press conference that ultimately we want to give India the F-35. What is that motivated by? Is it because the Chinese recently unveiled their 6th generation fighter and India does not currently have a 5th generation fighter? So do you see that being the motivation? And two, the mention in the joint statement about the production of the Javelins and the Strikers and India ordering 6 more Poseidon naval patrol aircraft and so on. There was a concern that Trump is viewing defense more from a transactional point of view and less from a strategic point of view. Has that concern been addressed with what he's offered India to buy?
I think, Zaka, you made a very significant point on how does Trump look at defense. Is it transactional or is it strategic? I've thought that it's a mixture of both. He does understand the importance of India in US strategic calculations and that he would like India to be part of, it won't be a US system of alliances because India will never be an ally, but part of the US system of partnerships, if I may use that. But at the same time, he is transactional. He wants India to buy more US defense equipment and expensive US defense equipment. Now the question is, India is of course perhaps the world's largest importer of defense equipment, but we have a certain traditional partners from where we acquire defense. High technology defense equipment we are purchasing gradually from the West. The question is whether we can be hastened here. I don't know whether that would be possible, and that may be an area of friction. But I'm sure that in this, perhaps the defense establishment in the United States might be able to temper Trump. I know that Trump at the moment is going through the American system like a whirlwind with his crony Elon Musk. But at the end of the day, it's been my experience that all bureaucracies in the world have a way of managing their politicians and people like Elon Musk.
Okay.
And the American bureaucracy, believe me, will be no different.
Okay, that's an interesting side note.
Woken up
Yeah,
and realized
Mr. Wadhwa wanted to comment on
has
that.
realized they're in trouble. I mean, they're in a state of shock. They're being ripped apart, department after
these
department, firing after firing.
Mr. Wadhwa, I can assure you the shock and awe won't last for a long time. At the end of the day, the American system will not work without bureaucracies. Without that bureaucracy,
cut it
and
down
Trump will
dramatically.
learn this soon enough. If a state is not a company, that is the first thing that has to be understood.
So here's the thing. So Mr.
Let's
Wadhwa,
watch and see, because I'm hopeful that they're going to rip it down to shreds, and it'll be a model for India.
I'm sorry to say,
twice as much.
you and I share the same name. If I may call you Vivek, you can call me Vivek. Vivek W, you are in for a shock. You will be in for a shock.
Let's watch and see.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But Mr. Wadhwa, the thing is, so it's a bit like this. Trump is saying, you can buy F-35s. It's the state of the art, perhaps the best stealth fighter in the world right now, because that means more dollars for my companies, American companies. Or is he saying, I'm allowing you to buy the F-35s because you have a problem with China? Because he didn't say particularly not very nice things about China yesterday in the press conference. In fact, he was seem pretty charitable towards China.
I think what's important over here is that he's elevating the partnership with India. He's offering the most advanced technologies, and also he knows that he has to rein in his own defense department. And to the extent that they can start producing in India, which is, I'm sure, is going to start happening, it'll reduce costs of American equipment, and there'll be a lot of technology transfer. So they're thinking strategically. He's only been in office for a few weeks now. His people haven't had a chance to sit down and work out the details with the Indian government. Over the next few months, you're going to see them working it out. And I think that he set the stage here, saying that India gets the most advanced technologies. We want India buying from the US, not from Russia, because this is about Russia at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Rather than buying the antiquated, equipment, you've seen it falling apart in Ukraine. All of their hardware and so on. It's a piece of garbage. It's antiquated. Well, if India can get the most advanced American equipment and be producing a lot of it in India itself, it's a win-win. That's where this is headed.
So, Brahmachalani, again, even on the question of oil and energy imports, it was only after the war in Ukraine began that India started importing so much oil from Russia. Obviously, it was being offered at a much discounted price. Now Trump is coming and saying there was a time before the war began where US was the #1 supplier to India of oil and gas. We want to go back to that. Again, is he viewing it purely as a businessman would? Like, you were buying stuff from me 3 years ago, a war happened, I'll stop that war, now you start buying my oil again.
Firstly, he's a businessman, a deal maker, and he means what he says. He also knows that India is susceptible to pressure. The US became the #1 supplier of oil and petroleum products to India during Trump's first term because of Trump's pressure on India. So from 2019, there was a spike in Indian purchases of American oil and petroleum products for 4 years in a row until the Russian invasion of Ukraine opened up cheaper oil for India. Now, when he says that he wants India to erase its trade surplus with the US, he means business. And that's a real challenge for India now, as to how do we actually reduce the trade surplus with the US. As far as weapons are concerned, on energy, let me say one thing, that the US does not offer any discounts on its oil and petroleum products.
Yeah.
I'm not talking of Russia's discounted oil, but even long-term contracts that India signs with, let's say, with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar for LNG, come with discounts. But the Americans don't offer discounts. So every $1 difference in oil price for India translates into many millions of dollars of extra expenditure per day, as the the International Energy Agency in Paris has said, that India today is now the world's largest source of oil demand. So every $1 difference makes a big difference, for India's economy. The second thing about weapons, and the F-35 offer is not an offer. There is no offer as such. It's ultimately they're going to offer it. Right now they're dangling the carrot. But India is not only the world's largest importer of military arms. India accounts for nearly 10% of the global trade in arms. So India is the more conventional weapons India imports, the more insecure it feels, because today's war has changed. You look at the threats that India has faced. For example, the Chinese encroachments into eastern Ladakh.
Yeah.
They took place without a shot being fired. Or look at the Ukraine war. What has the Ukraine war revealed? That the air power is not about fighter jets. Air power is really about missiles and drones.
Drones now, yeah.
So missiles and drones have been the most pivotal in the Ukraine war.
Okay.
So we need to look at air power a bit differently. Not looking at buying these expensive toys, even if they are offered to us. We need to look at how we can actually create the base at home to meet our defense needs.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Professor Chalani, Mr. Wadhwa, Ambassador Kaju. Thank you for joining us and putting your views into perspective as to what you make of the big visit by Prime Minister Modi to the White House. I also want to go across to Nirupama Rao, former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India. Ma'am, from the joint statement, and it reads into about 30-35 paragraphs, what are your big takeaways from what's been agreed upon by both sides?
Well, what stands out in the joint statement is the fact that we had assumed this all along, that there is a very positive continuum in this relationship, and it has been taken further forward as a result of this visit. There are various factors which I'd like to talk about as this discussion goes forward. But you look at the defense partnership, you look at what is happening on the energy security front, the reopening really of the prospects of cooperation in nuclear technology, for instance, and new frontiers in technology, whether it's space technology, augmented technology, undersea technology, and the effort to create new compacts defined literally by trust between the two countries. All these are very positive takeaways. Of course, there have been discussions on trade and on tariffs and obviously on immigration too. These are all givens in the relationship, but the overall matrix in which this relationship is embedded marks for and speaks of strategic convergence.
So you mentioned trade and tariffs, and we've been talking about it in the earlier part of the program as well. The fact that the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs just hours ahead of the bilateral, did that kind of sour the pitch? And how does now India navigate this whole threat of reciprocal tariffs?
Well, I think that despite the signing into effect of these reciprocal tariffs being applied to all countries by President Trump, I do believe that we had sufficient premonition that such a move was more than likely, given President Trump's vociferous championing of tariffs as a weapon in trade, and that America would not stand for unequal trading relations, which they consider as a quote-unquote rip-off with other countries. So we weren't exactly blown off course by this announcement, and I feel that this should spur India on to rationalize our own trade policies, knowing where give and take is needed and where the interests of our economic development and the needs of our population are not affected. So there's no doubt that India is one of the target countries of the new measures.
Yep.
While the US trade-weighted average tariff is 2.2% according to the WTO, India's average rate is 12% and reaches, in fact, I believe, 177% for oilseeds, fats, and oils. But the US, of course, also uses trade defense instruments, as for instance, during import surges. So it's no saint either. Now,
right.
India is expected now to increase its imports of US gas and oil that can help address the adverse trade balance that the US has with India. And increased purchases of defense equipment and defense systems are another area which can help reduce the imbalance.
So on that question of defense, there's been an announcement about the F-35. I mean, it was not there in the joint statement. It was mentioned in the press conference. The Strikers, the Javelins, the Poseidon P-8Is. Do you see Trump again sort of making this case to India, buy American weapons? It makes business sense for him to push that case. Or is he viewing it from the strategic threat that China is for India much more than it is for the United States? Because, we've seen evidence of that in the last 4 years since Galwan happened. Is Trump on the same page about the strategic threat that China is, and therefore the offer of these weapons?
I really don't believe there are any fundamental differences between the US and India in this regard. Of course, the context in which US-China relations are placed and the context in which India-China relations are placed may not exactly coincide, but that doesn't point to fundamental differences in approach. And Mr. Trump has, of course, announced at the outset of his new presidency that he wants to be a peacemaker, that he wants to bridge divides, that he wants to reconcile differences. So that seems to be the overall philosophy that he's tried to articulate. We'll have to see, of course, how this is actually implemented and how this plays out. He hasn't as yet met with either Mr. Putin or Mr. Xi Jinping. Let's see how the chemistry and the content of those discussions move forward. For this moment, I will say that Mr. Modi's visit if I can talk a little about the visit, I think it's been quite a masterclass in diplomacy. And Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi has, practiced this diplomacy quite deftly. He was able to combine Make America Great Again with Make India Great Again, and he created this new equation, which he called the mega partnership for peace and prosperity between the two democracies. So all this speaks of common ground and of commonalities between two democracies that have come together and have over the years built a very substantive, comprehensive global partnership.
All right, Nirupama Rao, thank you very much for joining us and putting into perspective what the visit's big takeaways are. I sat down with Professor John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago, one of the foremost experts in the world when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. And Prime Minister Modi's visit to the White House came just a day after President Trump had his first ever phone call with President Putin, as well as with President Zelensky right after, where he made it abundantly clear that he wants Russia and Ukraine to come to the negotiating table and put an end to this war. This war is going to be 3 years now running next week. Or the week after that. So clearly President Trump believes that he's a peacemaker. He believes that he's the anti-war president. So this was what I asked Professor Mearsheimer as to whether it is possible, whether it is realistic, the terms that have been offered to Ukraine, will it accept that? And more importantly, I also asked Professor Mearsheimer whether President Trump will lean on Prime Minister Modi to try and play some kind of an honest mediator, honest broker, a peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine. This is that conversation. Let's come to some of the international issues. It's been, like I said, just barely 3 weeks since Trump came to office. He signed more than 250, 300 executive orders, including the one on tariffs that's coming today. The most significant foreign policy phone call, I guess, happened yesterday when he spoke to both President Putin for the first time, I think, in many, many years, and also to President Zelensky. And Mr. Trump is convinced that this is the beginning of the all-elusive peace in Ukraine, this all-elusive ceasefire that he says Ukraine and Russia should have been working towards yesterday.
I think what happened yesterday, number one, was quite amazing. And number two, I think it plays to India's advantage in a significant way. And let me tell you what I think happened. I think President Trump, and especially the comments of Secretary of Defense Hegseth yesterday, made it clear that the United States has gone a long way towards accepting the main two conditions that the Russians demand to settle this war. I'm actually very surprised that this happened. Hegseth said that, and Trump said, that Ukraine would not be in NATO. And moreover, Hegseth made it clear that we're not going to give Ukraine security guarantees. This means that it is possible to get a genuinely neutral Ukraine, which is the first demand that Putin has made. Mm-hmm. The second demand is that the West and Ukraine accept the fact that Russia has annexed Crimea and it has annexed those four easternmost oblasts in Ukraine. And Hegseth basically said yesterday that we're going to do that. He didn't specifically say what territory the Russians could keep from an American perspective, but he implied that the Russians can keep what they've already conquered and maybe a bit more. And these are the two major demands that Putin has made of the West and of Ukraine. And it's not surprising that the Russians were ecstatic about what happened yesterday. The Europeans and the Ukrainians are profoundly upset, and many people in the United States are profoundly upset about what Trump is doing. Trump has fundamentally reversed, or appears to be fundamentally reversing, the Biden administration's foreign policy. Now, why is this good news for India? The Biden administration was very upset with India for not cracking down on the Russians, for not having an antagonistic relationship with Russia because of Ukraine. Well, if Trump flips the policy and Trump wants to work with the Russians and have good relations with Russia and end the war in Ukraine, largely on Russia's terms, that means that the Trump administration has no incentive to put pressure on India over Ukraine. And if anything, it has an incentive to work with India to get India to back it up as it moves towards a settlement with Russia over the Ukraine issue. So I think this is good news for India, and in my view, it's good news for Ukraine.
I'll come to the India part in just 1 second. Why would the Ukrainians accept such a deal? They have to give up about anywhere between a fourth and a fifth of the territory that they had before this war began. There are no guarantees, security guarantees. There is no NATO membership. Why would they agree to this?
It's not clear they will agree to it, right? I mean, and we also have to see what happens with the Europeans. There are three players here. The Europeans, the Ukrainians, and the Americans. Now, the Americans are the principal driving force, but as you're saying, we have to get the Ukrainians on board. And if they don't accept this deal, that could be a real problem. And I don't know how Trump will finesse that. But there's no question that Trump is moving in a fundamentally different direction than the Biden administration was moving in. And really what's going on here is that the Trump administration is facing up to the fact that the Russians are going to win this war. The Ukrainian military is falling apart on the battlefield. It's suffering serious defeats, is in real trouble. And what Trump and his lieutenants are saying is that it's time to shut this one down. There's no way we can shift the balance of power and rescue Ukraine. And let's cut a deal that's in America's interest and is in Ukraine's interest. Now, whether that can be done remains to be seen.
So I want to come to the part where you said this might be good news for India. And I'm also curious to know your thoughts on, Prime Minister Modi enjoys good relations with both President Putin of Russia and President Zelensky of Ukraine. He's, in fact, one of the few world leaders who's visited both countries since this war began. Do you think President Trump might, weigh in on him, perhaps lean on his sort of counsel, if not mediation, to try and find a middle ground between Russia and Ukraine?
I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. This is why I was saying that I think from India's point of view, this is good news, because the Trump administration will want to work with India. It will see India as an ally on this issue. And if Modi has good relations with Zelensky and with Putin, and he can talk to both of them and do something to help cajole the Ukrainians into accepting the peace settlement that the Americans want, that would be all for the good from America's point of view. I don't know that in the end Modi would be successful, or anybody would be successful at convincing the Ukrainians to go along with this deal. Excuse me, I think it's very hard to imagine Ukraine accepting the deal, but who knows?
All right. I'll come to the final part of this conversation, and I want to talk about Gaza, because Trump has been saying quite a few, really outrageous things about Gaza, about making it into the Riviera of the Middle East. Palestinians have no right to return. Egypt and Jordan should take more Palestinians, so on and so forth. If you can sort of separate all the sound and fury of the stuff that he's been saying from if there is a method in the madness to what he's trying to achieve. Ultimately, he wants to end that war too, but in terms which seem quite bizarre, at least on the face of it.
Yeah, I think your word outrageous is the right word to use to describe what Trump is proposing. I think it's morally reprehensible to talk about ethnically cleansing the Palestinians from Gaza. And furthermore, from a practical point of view, I don't see how that's possible. The Israelis have just spent 15 to 16 months pounding the Palestinians in Gaza for purposes of trying to drive them out, and they failed. The Palestinians are still there. Hamas is still there. So how is the United States going to get them out? And then who's going to take them?
Yeah.
This makes no sense at all. And to take it a step further, you want to remember that the ceasefire between the Palestinians and the Israelis came into effect on January 19th, the day before President Trump moved into the White House. He moved in on January 20th. And President Trump basically told the Israelis he wanted that ceasefire before he moved into the White House. So President Trump played an important role in making the ceasefire happen. And that looked like a good deal to almost everybody. Everybody was, except maybe Benjamin Netanyahu and people on his right, were happy about a ceasefire. Then Trump starts talking about turning Gaza into the Riviera in the Middle East. And if anything, that undermines the ceasefire, which he had gotten credit for helping put into place. So in a very important way, it didn't make sense. So I can't give you a good explanation for what he's thinking here. I mean, what he did was he put forth an outrageous and impractical idea that, if anything, undermined the policy that he appeared to be pushing as he moved into the White House.
All right. And I want to get one final question in. I want to know your thoughts on this whole relationship between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. The Democrats are saying, you know, Elon is the real president. The Time magazine had a cover photograph of Elon Musk sitting behind the Resolute desk. Again, help our viewers try and make sense of this. Is Trump using Musk as some kind of a wrecking ball to shake up the federal government and the bureaucracy? And when do you think this honeymoon is going to end? Because it looks like, I mean, both men have pretty big egos, so it has to end at some point.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that Trump has a huge ego, and when they put Elon Musk, you know, on a magazine cover and he's portrayed as the real president, you would think that this would drive Donald Trump crazy. Apparently, it's not done that. I think that Trump understands that if he's going to do a wrecking ball operation, both on the foreign policy front and on the domestic policy front, he can't do it all by himself. And he has to delegate responsibility. And Elon Musk is the ideal person to turn to help do the wrecking on the domestic front. And Musk, I think it's fair to say, is acting as a wrecking ball, and he doesn't care what anybody says about him. So from Trump's point of view, he is, you know, an ideal person to help him. And I think maybe Trump feels that he is the president. Remember, he has 4 more years in front of him. The guy hasn't even been in power for 1 month. So Elon Musk over the next 4 years is not going to seriously undermine Trump's position as the leader of the United States. So I think what's happened here is that they've come to terms.
All right, Professor John Mearsheimer, as always, a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for your time and your valuable insights. Thank you.
Rise above.
Your Excellency, राष्ट्रपति ट्रम्प,
President Trump,
दोनों देशों के डेलीगेट्स,
delegates of both countries,
मीडिया के साथियों,
friends from the media,
नमस्कार।
Namaskar.
सबसे पहले
I would like to, first of all,
राष्ट्रपति ट्रम्प को
express
मेरे शानदार
my
स्वागत
heartfelt
और
gratitude
आतिथ्य सत्कार के
to
लिए
my dear friend President
हार्दिक
Trump
आभार व्यक्त
for
करता
the
हूं।
grand welcome and hospitality
राष्ट्रपति
accorded to
ट्रम्प
me.
ने
President Trump's
भारत और अमेरिका
leadership
संबंधों को
has been
अपने नेतृत्व
instrumental in nurturing India-US ties
जीवन को
and making them vibrant.
जिस उत्साह से
I could
उनकी
feel
पहली
today
टर्म में
the same enthusiasm, the same
वही उमंग
enthusiasm, the same energy, the same commitment that we had worked with during our first term.
आज की चर्चाओं में
Our discussions today
उनके पहले टर्म में
highlighted
हमारी उपलब्धियों का
our
संतोष
pride in our accomplishments during his first
गहरे
term,
आपसी
the
विश्वास
deep
का
mutual trust
सेतु था।
that we share,
साथ ही
and
नए
also
लक्ष्यों को प्राप्त
the
करने का
resolve to attain
संकल्प भी
new
था।
goals.
हम मानते मैंने आज भी महसूस की है। आज की चर्चाओं में उनके पहले टर्म में हमारी उपलब्धियों का संतोष और गहरे आपसी विश्वास का सेतु था। साथ ही नए लक्ष्यों को प्राप्त करने का संकल्प भी था। हम मानते हैं कि भारत और अमेरिका का साथ और सहयोग एक बेहतर विश्व को शेप कर सकता है। फ्रेंड्स, अमेरिका के लोग राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप के मोटो मेक अमेरिका ग्रेट अगेन यानी मागा से परिचित है। भारत के लोग भी विरासत और विकास की पटरी पर विकसित भारत 2047 के दृढ़ संकल्प को लेकर तेज गति शक्ति से विकास की ओर अग्रसर है। अमेरिका की भाषा में कहूं तो विकसित भारत का मतलब मेक इंडिया ग्रेट अगेन यानी मिगा। जब अमेरिका और भारत साथ मिलकर काम करते हैं यानी मागा, मागा प्लस मिगा, तब बन जाता है मेगा पार्टनरशिप फॉर प्रॉस्पेरिटी। और यही मेगा स्पिरिट हमारे लक्ष्यों को नया स्केल और स्कोप देती है। फ्रेंड्स, आज हमने द्विपक्षीय व्यापार को 2030 तक 2 गुना से भी अधिक बढ़ाकर $500 बिलियन तक पहुंचाने का लक्ष्य निर्धारित किया है। हमारी टीमें एक पारस्परिक लाभकारी ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को शीघ्र संपन्न करने पर काम करेगी। भारत की ऊर्जा सुरक्षा सुनिश्चित करने में हम ऑयल तथा गैस ट्रेड को बल देंगे। ऊर्जा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में निवेश भी बढ़ेगा। न्यूक्लियर एनर्जी क्षेत्र में हमने स्मॉल मॉड्यूलर रिएक्टर्स की दिशा में सहयोग बढ़ाने पर भी बात की। फ्रेंड्स, भारत की डिफेंस प्रिपेयर्डनेस में अमेरिका की महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका है। स्ट्रैटेजिक और ट्रस्ट